We may be a majority in numbers, right? But we need to become citizens and we need to vote, because the combination of your vote, and there's a lot of us, is a lot of power. And we're not quite there yet.
Welcome to the Political Maverick, the podcast that keeps you informed, engaged, and entertained on all things current events. Let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to the Political Maverick podcast. My name is Jaime Rojas. We have a great guest today, a good friend of mine for over 20 years, currently the CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, also known as CHLI or CHLI, based in Washington, D.C. Mary Anne Gomez, welcome to the show. Tell us a little about the organization, and then we'll go a little about your background. I know you have over 35 years of experience on local, state, and federal government. You've been in D.C. for almost over a decade. Sacramento, you're a native Californian. Tell us a little bit about CHLI, and then we'll go from there. Welcome.
Great. Well, thank you, and I very much appreciate this opportunity. You're starting to say all the years, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've known each other that long. And,
Don't remind me. Don't remind me.
Yes, oh my gosh, I'm feeling older by the minute. So yes, Mary Anne Gomez-Orta, President and CEO of CHLI, which is what we refer to affectionately. I am from Stockton, California, and I've been in Washington, D.C., since 2009. But I've been leading CHLI for 13 and a half years. I'm one of those that's like, I'm going to be in Washington for a short time, make some impact, make some connections, do some good, and go back home.
Right.
Well, I've done a lot of good, but I've decided to stay a little longer and really, really enjoy it, because our work basically, in a nutshell, is about advancing the diversity of thought. A lot of us Latinos, we don't all vote the same. We don't all are from the same political party. We're not all from the same countries of origin. My family's of Mexican heritage. My husband was born in Cuba. We don't speak the same Spanish,
Exactly.
So there's a lot of nuances. And so at the crust of things, what CHLI is, we are a leadership development organization. And our focus is really on doing our best to train and educate and inform Hispanic college students to consider going into public service. And we also give them a little bit of exposure into corporate life, because, Jaime, I don't know about you, man, but, me growing up in a farm worker camp, I didn't know anything about public service.
Absolutely.
Or a major corporation. My parents got up, when the sun went up to go to work in the fields, and then came home when the sun was out, because then you couldn't work anymore. So
we
I didn't
first
grow
generation.
up with anybody.
We're first generation. No, there was no mentors or anything it was just
no.
You make a mistake, you keep moving forward, and you just had to be consistent and keep moving forward. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So, there's this dynamic, right, where I think sometimes even with the students who we work with, right, they're kind of still in that survival mode. I mean, I find myself sometimes, dear Lord, I have a master's and MBA, and I still find myself sometimes in that little bit of that survival mode, because I don't know everything that other people, in my sphere that have had, generations telling them how to work, how to run nonprofits, how to run businesses. I'm learning as well sometimes.
And Mary Anne, with the organization, what are some of the initiatives you guys are working on right now to get that great service and work you do to the Latino community?
So couple of the big things that we do is to really get that bicameral bipartisanship. We're one of the few, if not the only, Hispanic serving and Hispanic led organization in Washington, D.C. that has members on the Senate and on the House on both sides of the party represented on our board. And one of the things that we really try to focus on too, Jaime, is that one of the founders, former Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart, and I would always talk about, is that, we want to be at the table, right? We want to be invited to the table to have that conversation. Well, we need to do the same thing.
Right.
We need
Absolutely.
we need to invite other people who maybe don't look or sound like us to our table.
Right.
And then that way they also get to learn and have that more, understand our familia concept, right? And understand that we hug and kiss and and
the diversity of our
we
own
do
community.
business.
Yep.
And we do business, right? So through all of that, some of our big initiatives that we work on is we basically look at what are the issues going on in Washington, and then we discuss those through public policy Hill briefings. And we have members of Congress, we have lobbyists, corporate executives, think tanks, university folks come and talk about what some of those issues are, and really how they impact our Hispanic Latino communities. And so we do that on a quarterly basis. We also have a trade symposium during Hispanic Heritage Month. Again, a little nuance with our group is that we want to recognize and honor our collective countries of origin. And so we do focus on what's going on in the Western Hemisphere. We have a lot of human rights issues in Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela going on right now in our own backyard. And we have family and friends from those countries. And so during the trade symposium, we talk about the nuances of trade, of diplomacy, of the rule of law, different things that we need to kind of keep in mind in terms of trade. And then obviously that, like I said, the top thing is our internship programs. And we now have about 300 alumni over the different programs that we've had. And so, when you're in town, I'm sure you're going to run into a former CHLI intern.
Well, and you have some pretty heavy hitters on your board. I mean, you mentioned Congressional. I mean, you have some that are on the Appropriations Committee, Ways and Means, and that's significant. I mean, you're talking about elected officials that, have been there for many years, who understand the ins and outs of federal government. And that's a great mentor, and those are great leadership committee members and the reason why you are bipartisan is because of that. You have Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the aisle. For us, and you're absolutely right, Latinos are so diverse in their food, so diverse in their language, so diverse in their history. Why wouldn't politically we be diverse as well? And unfortunately, you kind of touched on this. Many of the national organizations tend to lean more left versus more right. And this will kind of swing to my next question. I know November, we saw a slide completely Republican from the president all the way to Congress, state level, as well as local level. Your position, Chile's position in a great way. It doesn't really impact you on the services and the mission you provide. And tell us how important that is being, bipartisan.
Yeah. Well, look, like we said at the beginning, right? I've been leading this organization for 13 and a half years. So it's been, a Democrat, a Republican, or, whatever it is, right, on different levels, right? And people have asked before, oh my gosh, how do you navigate this side and how do you navigate that side? Well, a couple of things is one is when you know what your purpose and your core values are, everything else is noise.
Yep.
Right?
Very true.
And anything, right? Like, whether it's your business, your family, whatever, right? You need to know what your values are, what you're really focused on. Sure, there's times when it kind of, like a fly, right, gets in your way, right? But at the same time, there's beauty in being involved and being in when something isn't all nice and pretty. So let me give you a quick example and I come back. I've spoken to students, college students, at my alma mater, for example, at the University of the Pacific or St. Mary's College. And I tell business students in particular, I said, you know what? When you're trying to figure out where to go to work, open the Wall Street Journal, front page, and there's like a little column on the side. On the column, look at that. Who are the companies that are having a hard time? Who are the companies that need that extra push? Because that's where you want to work. That's when you're going to learn. You got to push yourself and be in those spaces because just like, a pearl or a diamond, right? You got to work through that tough time to polish and shine. So it's kind of the same concept. At least that's how I address it and work with it in Washington. Now, to your point, in November, and now we're seeing that it's, a Republican coming in the White House in a couple of weeks. We've got the House members. We're all sworn in on the Senate side as well. So the opportunity for Republicans is really, from what I've seen in other times, is they got 2 years. They got, they got 2 years to really get whatever it is that they're working on and fine tune it. But they also have a lot of opportunity because, like you said, on our board, we have a couple of board members on the congressional side that have also been there longer than me.
Right.
So they've seen what it's like when it's, a Republican or a Democrat. And especially for the ones that have been on the Hill longer, man, they have all the information, right? They know what it's been like over different leadership to work on appropriations, how to navigate through immigration, how to navigate through border security, how to navigate environmental issues. They have awesome staff, and they have already sample of legislation that they worked through before. So I think that there's the opportunity to really figure out, even if it's just all Republican now, you're not going to get anything done if you don't get along with the folks on this other side of the aisle. It's just not going to happen.
Absolutely.
So I think these are just great opportunities overall in Congress. Now, out at the local community level, I think that one of the things that I've always told people and that I love to see is I love to see Latinos voting. We may be a majority in numbers, right? But we need to become citizens and we need to vote, because the combination of your vote and there's a lot of us is a lot of power. And we're not quite there yet.
Well, and it's interesting because we've been talking, I would say, for the past 2 decades about Latinos and the sleeping giant coming out.
Oh, I know. We've been the sleeping giant for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think this past election, we began to see the numbers, even in California, where we're both from, where a third of the voters were Republicans. We saw Latino males especially voting more Republican. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, I think we've realized, and the world outside of Latinoism, as I call it, begin to realize we're no different from anyone else. We're Americans. We want the basics. We want a roof over our head, food on the table, stable jobs, be able to save and buy a house, put the kids through college. And I think we realize that that's at this stage right now, and we see in California how everything is so expensive. It just wasn't happening. And so change needs to happen. We saw a Democratic Party who would only come to us when they needed a vote and then disappear for 2 to 4 years until the next election cycle. And then we'll see. I think we're giving the Republican Party a chance to say, okay, let's see what you can do or not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, as you know, my background is in corporate marketing and PR. And I can remember, in the late 90s, here I go again dating myself, but, in the late 90s, talking about marketing and Hispanic marketing. Right. And I would tell clients, and then when I worked in corporate, I would say the same thing. And I'm like, look, the majority of the time, putting up a flyer or doing an announcement, that's not inviting us to the table. Like, we want to be invited, right? We want to be invited to learn about your product, to learn about your service, and really genuinely explain to us. I mean, we are storytellers, and we love stories. That's how we pass our family stories for most of the time, right? I mean, it's from, grandma, and, we're sitting around the table talking. And so we want to hear why we should use your product. We want to hear why we should go to your event or what have you. And for some reason, that gets lost in elections, in campaigns. Like, sure, the canvassing is hard and people have to go out and knock on doors, but a lot of times our doors don't get knocked on.
No, they don't.
And so especially out in rural America, like I said, I grew up in a farm worker camp. Nobody came to visit us, No, but, we would also pray that we didn't have an emergency because, the closest hospital is 45 minutes away, and God forbid an ambulance could even find us.
Right.
And so I tell people that the majority of our great country is rural.
It is.
The majority of our country is not in the big cities. Now, yes, you got big cities and you have the suburban communities and you have that dynamic in terms of, where the electoral votes are, right? But please don't forget us out in the rural communities, because there's a great richness of a lot of our country. People in those communities are business owners, community leaders. They really want to get more involved. And so I'm hopeful, to your point, that a lot of eyes open and that a lot of people are invited, and that we do see a lot more engagement, not outreach, but actual engagement from both sides of the aisle.
And what you said is absolutely right. We're storytellers. We're a community that's extremely loyal. Brand loyalty, if you give us, something that works and makes sense will be with you for a lifetime. And I think
Right.
that's what, part of corporate America understands. I know you have a very good group of corporate America on your board as well. And that mix of government and business is important. I mean, it's dynamic in everything we do day in and day out.
Mhm.
And you sit in an area in Washington, D.C. to be able to look at trends. Talk to me about what trends are impactful. And you hit the nail on the head. I think the ability to be on the decision table is crucial. And the
Right.
people you have on your board, yourself included, are on those tables, and you're able to do that because you bring value. What impacts do you see in the next 4 years that we need to do as a community, as diverse as we are from Florida to Texas to
Right.
California, to be able to be even more impactful and to be engaged?
Many times I have to remind people that the members of Congress are there to serve us
Right.
in the community, right? Now I know that on, media, it looks like they're fighting and that they don't get along. And, there are some that in certain issues, maybe they don't get along, but the majority of the time, the news doesn't cover when they do get along, when their staffs are meeting together, when they're kind of, workshopping and going through all the stuff, right? So I tell people at the local level, don't forget that elected officials are there to serve. So when you have a concern, when you have an issue, when you have a small business and you need some support, you're working on a project or whatever that may be, reach out to whatever that level is, right? Your city council, your county, your member of Congress. It doesn't matter if you voted for the person,
Right.
and it doesn't matter if they're of the other party, right? That they're there to serve. And so, what I've seen and what I'm hopeful, and as we're going through this, is that there is a lot more partnership on the public and private side. I think that's been happening, but I think that COVID really pushed the two together to work more together.
Absolutely.
And to really figure out, like where one starts, maybe the other one can come in and vice versa. I literally got a text message this morning from a very dear friend who works for the governor of Virginia, and they're having a crisis right now with water in the city of Richmond. And, he's texting me saying, hey, do you know so-and-so at this company, or what about this company? And we're brainstorming, right? We're brainstorming over text on how we can help. He's with the governor, and the governor needs to make sure that they connect with the people in the private sector. So I just see a lot more of these public and private partnerships really working, and like I said, kind of workshopping through some of the issues that we have, both at the national level and even international.
Well, and that's a perfect example of being being on the table where people will reach out as leadership to yourself, to the rest of the board members of both, on the government side and the public side, to be able to make decisions, to be able to be engaged. And that's one of the most important parts of just living in this country, is being engaged, finding something that you're passionate about and just going all in. Mary Anne, one last thing you hear is, what do you see the future with Latinos in leadership, both in business and government, especially your organization, both, in the next few years?
So a couple of things is maybe in a couple of different levels here, but in terms of the Latino leadership, we need to train more Latinos to be community leaders, to be the next Mary Anne's, to be the next, CEOs of nonprofits. We don't have a lot of people really considering being in nonprofits. So that's an area where we kind of need to work on. So because nonprofits in this country, in Washington, D.C., play a big role. In other countries, nonprofits maybe aren't as engaged.
Right.
But in Washington, D.C., you really have the nonprofits, the government, and the private sector. And the three work together. And so it's really important that we do a little bit more training on the nonprofit side. It could be, at think tanks or different things like that as well. On the Hill side, in Congress, it's nice to see more Hispanics on the Republican side coming in. We have a lot of Hispanics on the Democrat side, but we also don't have a good mix regionally. Right. So we need more Latinos, Hispanics from different parts of the country running for Congress and getting more involved on either side of the aisle. And then on the business side, we don't have as many Latinos. We have a number of Latinos working in the private sector and government relations, but they're not the heads of the office. They're not in charge of the office.
And we just talked about
And
this.
so,
I mean, we were just
yeah,
talking about this last month in DC about, with my firm doing local, state, and federal, and the only Republican Latino-owned firm in Washington, D.C., which just blew my mind, that's Latino-owned. And so, Rojas Public Affairs, I'm like, how is that? But as we're going through names, they're from larger
right,
firms versus a Latino-owned firm, which blew my mind. And I think one of the main things, if we can finish off with this, is you lead by example. CHLI leads by example. If you can give us kind of some important timelines for applications, also the website, and we'll put that on as well, for students to be able to apply, to look for mentors, to look for opportunities. And sometimes, even if it's not government, even if it's not business, you find out what you like and don't. So
right,
give us
right.
some timelines of applications, when they're due, and the website address as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jaime, for asking. So our website is CHLI.org. And if you look on the website, on the pages regarding internships, you'll see we have a Global Leaders Program, which is our flagship program, Hispanic college students. And also, if you just graduated within the last year, you also can apply and qualify. The internship program is where interns spend 2 months on the Hill and then 2 months in a government relations office in Washington. So again, you get the opportunity to really see how public service works, how the private sector works. And because you're going to be a CHLI intern, you'll see how nonprofits engage.
Absolutely.
So you really get that trifecta perspective. The applications are going to be opening up. We close in April. It's more or less about a month for the fall semester. Nicole Marin on my team manages the internship programs. Great. Her email is also on the website. Anybody can also email her. You can check out the information on the website. And to your point, Jaime, is look, you don't have to be a political science major, because whatever your major is, it's going to be impacted by Washington.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
If you thought of studying abroad and you're like, I don't know that I want to study abroad, come and study in Washington, D.C., whether it's through our program or another program. There's a lot of different programs in Washington, D.C., and they're paid internships. Okay.
Absolutely.
We have paid internships. Also, members of Congress have a budget now for paid internships as well. So if you want to, go for it directly, check with your member of Congress, and see what opportunities they may have, because if it's not through our program, maybe they have something else. And there's other nonprofits in Washington as well that have paid internships.
And Mary Anne, I know it, and it's changed. I know when I interned in the White House, geez, I don't even want to date myself. I want to say 3 years ago, they were non-paid. For many of us Latinos whose families are of low income and just getting into college is a hurdle enough. Mm-hmm. Now going to an unknown city like Washington, D.C., not being able to work and not having the funds to be able to do an internship, it is many times impossible.
Right.
Things have changed. I'm appreciative of your time, Mary Anne, and the resources that CHLI has and the resources that you have. Continue being the leader that you are. Continue moving forward with CHLI and the great work that you do. We'll put all the information on our podcast and the timelines as well for students to apply. Continue the great work, my friend. And thank you for joining the Political Maverick podcast. And I'll see you in Washington soon.
Thank you. And God bless. And I hope that everyone who's listening and watching, like I said before, get involved. We need you. We need all the different perspectives. So let's not complain. Let's get in there and engage.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Thank you so much, Mary Anne. I appreciate you, amiga. And then we'll talk soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Political Maverick. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X for updates. Catch every episode on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. See you next time.